The smell of stale coffee and burnt grease was a permanent ghost in the diner. It clung to the cracked red vinyl of the booths, to my light blue uniform, to the ends of my hair. I was 19, and my life was a repeating loop of wiping down sticky tables and refilling ketchup bottles. Tonight, the loop was broken by the chime of the bell over the door, a sound that cut through the low hum of the fluorescent lights with the finality of a guillotine. 4 men walked in. 3 were broad, dressed in dark suits that seemed to absorb the already dim light. They moved with a disciplined economy, their eyes scanning the near-empty diner with a cold, professional assessment. But it was the man in the center they orbited around who made the air in the room turn thin and sharp. He was not large, but he was carved from something denser than the other men. His suit was a shade of charcoal so deep it was almost black, tailored with a precision that made it look less like clothing and more like a second skin. He moved like the room owed him space. His posture was a straight, unyielding line. A single, perfectly folded white pocket square was the only break in the darkness. He didn't look at the room, he consumed it. Mr. Henderson, my boss, a man whose spine was made of jelly, scurried out from the kitchen. He wiped his sweaty palms on his already stained apron, his usual bluster replaced by a pathetic, trembling deference. "Mr. Kwan," he said, his voice a high-pitched squeak.
"An honor."
"Your usual table?" The man, Kwan Jinwoo, gave a nearly imperceptible nod. His men fanned out, one taking the booth behind, 2 others facing the door. Jinwoo slid into the booth by the window, the one with the best view of the street and all the exits. He didn't so much sit as occupy the space, an act of silent conquest. "Chloe," Mr. Henderson hissed, grabbing my arm. His fingers dug into my bicep, his breath sour with fear and cheap cigars. "You take their order." My heart hammered against my ribs. I was usually sent to the kitchen when men like this showed up. The other waitress, a tired woman named Brenda, was the one who handled them. She knew how to be invisible. I did not. "Brenda usually," I started. "Brenda went home sick," he lied, his eyes darting toward the booth. "And I'm not going over there."
"It's just coffee. Go on."
"Don't stare. Don't talk unless they talk to you. And for God's sake, don't spill anything." He shoved a notepad and pen into my hand. It felt like he was handing me a live grenade. He saw the terror on my face, and a cruel little smirk twisted his lips. It was a joke to him. Sending the new girl, the young black girl who was saving up for community college, into the lion's den. My feet felt like lead, but I forced them to move. Each step was a lifetime. The air grew colder as I approached the table. I could feel the eyes of his men on me, dissecting me. I kept my own gaze fixed on the scuffed linoleum floor. When I reached the table, I could smell him. It was a clean, sharp scent beneath the diner's grime. Bergamot and something else, something like cold steel and smoke. It was utterly out of place, a scent from a world of penthouses and custom cars, not cheap coffee and regret. I stood there, silent, my knuckles white around the notepad. The silence stretched, thick and heavy.
It was a test.
Finally, I forced myself to speak, my voice barely a whisper. "Can I get you anything?" He didn't answer immediately. I felt his gaze on me, and I made the mistake of looking up. His eyes were not black, but a deep, dark brown. They were still, unnervingly so, like the surface of a frozen lake. But beneath the ice, something was moving. He wasn't looking at me like a waitress. He was looking at me like a puzzle he was considering solving. He took in my worn-out sneakers, the faded blue of my dress, the nervous tremor in my hand. His eyes lingered for a moment on a faint, old bruise on my wrist from a fall I'd taken last week. "For coffees," he said. His voice was a low, quiet rumble. It wasn't loud, but it commanded the entire diner. "Black." I scribbled it down, my hand shaking so badly the letters were illegible. I turned to leave, desperate to escape the crushing weight of his presence. That was when the world exploded. The diner's front window shattered inward, a deafening roar of gunfire erupting from the street. Glass rained down like sleet. I screamed, dropping the notepad and throwing my hands over my head as instinct took over. Before I could even process what was happening, a heavy weight slammed into me, driving me to the floor. It was him, Kwon Jin-woo. He had moved with impossible speed, crossing the space between us in a blink. His body was a shield over mine, the expensive fabric of his suit pressed against my cheek, the solid muscle of his back protecting me from the chaos. The scent of bergamot and smoke filled my senses, drowning out the acrid smell of gunpowder. His men were already returning fire, the sharp cracks of their handguns a terrifying counterpoint to the automatic weapons outside. Beneath me, the floor vibrated with the impact of bullets tearing through the cheap booths. I could feel the rhythmic beat of his heart against my side, a steady, calm drum in the middle of a hurricane. He was utterly still, his breathing even. He moved through violence like it was a language he was born speaking. I squeezed my eyes shut, a whimper escaping my lips. A hand, large and warm, settled on the back of my neck. It was a gesture of control, not comfort. "Do not move," he murmured, his voice right beside my ear, so close I could feel the warmth of his breath. The sound was a low vibration that seemed to travel straight down my spine. The firefight was over in less than a minute. The silence that followed was somehow louder, more terrifying than the noise. It was filled with the tinkle of falling glass and the drip of something I didn't want to identify. Jin-woo shifted his weight off me, rising to his feet in one fluid, graceful motion. He stood over me, a dark silhouette against the shattered window. The streetlights outside cast long, distorted shadows into the ruined diner. Mr. Henderson was whimpering from behind the counter. One of Jin-woo's men was on the floor, bleeding from his arm. The other two were at the door, weapons still drawn, eyes fixed on the street. My world, the one of ketchup bottles and dreams of a better life, had been obliterated. I was just a girl in a cheap blue dress, lying on a dirty floor littered with glass and death. Jin-woo looked down at me. His face was a mask of cold calculation, but his eyes, those dark, still eyes, held something else. He saw me not as collateral damage, but as a complication, a loose thread in his perfectly tailored world.
"Get up," he said.
It wasn't a request. I scrambled to my feet, my legs shaking uncontrollably. My uniform was torn at the shoulder, and a shard of glass had sliced my arm. Blood welled up, a bright, shocking red against my brown skin. I stared at it, numb. One of his men said something in Korean, his tone urgent. Jin-woo replied with a single, sharp word. He never took his eyes off me. He knew it. I knew it. I had seen his face. I had been shielded by his body. In his world, witnesses did not walk away. They became ghosts. He took a step toward me. I flinched back, my breath catching in my throat. He stopped, his expression unreadable. He reached into his jacket, and for a terrifying second, I thought he was going to pull out a gun. Instead, he withdrew the pristine white pocket square. He closed the distance between us, and before I could react, he took my arm. His touch was firm, his fingers wrapping around my wrist. He gently dabbed the silk square against the cut, his movements precise and economical. The fabric, impossibly soft, came away stained with my blood. He held my gaze as he did it. The silence between us was not empty. It was filled with the truth of what had just happened, and the terrifying uncertainty of what would happen next. "What is your name?" he asked, his voice still that low, quiet rumble. "Chloe," I whispered. He said my name, tasting the shape of it. Chloe, he said it differently than anyone else had. He said it like it was an object he had just acquired, something that now belonged to him. His men were waiting, impatient to leave. The sirens were wailing in the distance, growing closer. He still held my arm. He let the bloody pocket square fall to the floor. "You will come with me," he said. It was not a question.
It was a statement of fact.
My life as a waitress was over. My new life, as a witness, a liability, a piece on Kwon Jin-woo's bloody chessboard, was just beginning. He pulled me toward the back exit, and I went, because the thought of staying in the ruins of my old life was somehow more terrifying than walking into the darkness of his. The car was a black sedan, so sleek and silent it seemed to be carved from the night itself. The interior smelled of rich leather and his cologne. I was pushed into the back seat, with Jinwoo beside me. The door closed with a heavy, final thud, sealing me in. As the car pulled away, I looked back at the diner, at its flickering neon sign and shattered windows. It looked like a scene from a movie, unreal and distant. My entire world, reduced to a fading image in a rearview mirror. We drove through the sleeping city, the streetlights painting fleeting stripes of orange across Jinwoo's impassive face. He didn't speak. He simply stared out the window, his jaw set, his hands resting on his knees. I sat as far away from him as I could, pressing myself against the door, my body thrumming with a terror so profound it felt like a physical illness. Where was he taking me? What would he do to me? My mind raced, conjuring 1,000 terrible possibilities. But beneath the fear, a strange, unwelcome thought surfaced. When his body had covered mine, I had never felt safer. It was a crazy, irrational feeling, but it was there, a tiny, stubborn ember of warmth in the freezing cold of my fear. The car descended into an underground parking garage and stopped in a private, brightly lit bay. We were escorted to an elevator that opened directly into a penthouse apartment. The place was vast and minimalist, all glass and steel and shades of gray. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a breathtaking, godlike view of Seoul's glittering skyline. It was a world away from my tiny, cramped apartment above a laundromat. It was a cage made of glass. One of the men, the one who had been shot in the arm, was being tended to by another man in a doctor's coat who seemed to have appeared from nowhere. Jinwoo ignored them. He walked to a massive window, his back to me. "The police will have your name from your boss," he said, his voice echoing slightly in the cavernous room. "The men who attacked us will be looking for you, too. They will assume you work for me now, or that you can identify them." I hugged myself, the thin fabric of my uniform offering no comfort. "I won't say anything. I swear. I didn't see anything." He turned slowly. "You saw me. That is enough." His gaze dropped to the cut on my arm, which had started bleeding again. He gave a sharp nod to one of his men, who disappeared and returned a moment later with a first aid kit. Jinwoo took it from him and dismissed him with a flick of his wrist. The remaining men melted away, leaving us completely alone. The silence they left behind was heavier than their presence had been. He gestured to a low, gray sofa. "Seat." I obeyed, perching on the edge of the cushion. He knelt in front of me, opening the kit. The gesture was so unexpected it stole my breath. A man who commanded death and loyalty was kneeling at my feet. He worked with the same surgical precision he seemed to apply to everything, cleaning the wound with an antiseptic wipe that stung fiercely. I hissed in a breath, and his eyes flickered up to mine. "My younger sister," he said, his voice quiet, almost devoid of emotion. "She was afraid of everything. The dark. Loud noises. The sight of blood." He paused, his fingers stilling for a fraction of a second. "She was with me once when a meeting went wrong. Much like tonight. She panicked. She ran." He didn't need to finish the story. The ending was there in the sudden, bleak emptiness of his eyes. It was a wound he carried, a failure he could never outrun, a ghost that haunted this sterile, perfect penthouse. He was not just seeing me, Chloe, the waitress. He was seeing her. A girl in the wrong place at the wrong time. A girl he had failed to protect. He finished bandaging my arm, his touch surprisingly gentle. The contrast between the softness of his hands and the lethal stillness of his body was a dizzying contradiction. He rose to his feet, the moment of vulnerability gone as quickly as it had appeared. The mask of the cold, untouchable boss was back in place. "You will stay here," he said. "It is the only safe place for you now." Days bled into a week. I was a prisoner in a gilded cage. I had a beautiful room with an adjoining bathroom larger than my entire apartment. I was given clothes, simple, elegant things in silk and cashmere that felt alien against my skin. Food appeared outside my door on a tray. I never saw who brought it. I spent my days staring out at the city, a place I could see but not touch. Jinwoo was a ghost. I would hear him sometimes, his low voice speaking in Korean on the phone, or the quiet sound of his footsteps in the hall. But I rarely saw him. The few times I did, he would simply look at me, his expression unreadable, before moving on. I was his problem to solve, a living piece of evidence he had hidden away. One evening, I found the courage to leave my room. The apartment was silent. I tiptoed into the main living area. A television was on, tuned to a news channel, the volume muted. The headline made my blood run cold. They were showing a picture of me, a grainy photo from my diner ID badge. They called me a person of interest in the diner massacre. They said I was missing, presumed to be in danger. My legs gave out, and I sank to the floor. My old life wasn't just gone. It was being rewritten into a crime story where I was a central character. There was no going back. Ever. A floorboard creaked behind me. I spun around to see Jinwoo standing in the doorway of his study. He was holding a glass of amber liquid. He looked at the screen, then at me. "They have made you a target," he said, stating the obvious. "My enemies now believe you are important to me. They will use you to draw me out. Then let me go," I pleaded, my voice cracking. "I'll disappear. I'll go somewhere they'll never find me." He walked over and switched off the television, plunging the room into the soft glow of the city lights. "There is nowhere you can go that they will not find you. There is nowhere I cannot find you." He took a sip of his drink. "Your only chance of survival is to remain by my side." He was right. I knew he was right. Leaving meant a death sentence, either from his rivals or from him silencing a loose end. Staying felt like just a slower, more suffocating version. That was the moment I made a choice. I would not be a passive victim waiting for the axe to fall. If I was going to be in this world, I would learn its rules. I would survive. "What do you want from me?" I asked, pushing myself to my feet, meeting his gaze. For the first time, I saw a flicker of something in his eyes.
Surprise?
"Respect?" "For now," he said, his voice a low murmur. "I want you to stay alive." The next week, the Gilded Cage became a training ground. Jinwoo assigned one of his lieutenants, a stern, silent man named Park, to teach me things. Not how to fight, but how to see. How to notice a car that has been behind you for more than 3 blocks. How to spot someone who doesn't belong in a crowd. How to walk into a room and immediately locate all the exits. I was a quick study. Fear was a powerful motivator. One afternoon, Jinwoo took me with him. We were moving to a different safe house. As we walked through the underground garage, I felt it, a prickling on the back of my neck. A maintenance van was parked where it shouldn't be. A man in overalls was leaning against it, smoking, but his eyes were too sharp, his posture too tense. "Stop," I whispered, grabbing Jinwoo's arm. He froze, his body going rigid. He followed my gaze. His eyes narrowed. "Get back in the elevator," he ordered Park. But it was too late. The man in overalls dropped a cigarette and pulled a gun. The back of the van flew open. 2 more men pouring out, weapons raised. Jinwoo moved. He shoved me behind a concrete pillar, his own gun appearing in his hand as if by magic. The garage erupted in a cacophony of gunfire and screeching tires. I pressed myself against the cold concrete, my heart trying to beat its way out of my chest. I peered around the edge of the pillar. Jinwoo was using a black SUV for cover, exchanging fire with a terrifying, calm efficiency. But one of the gunmen was circling around, flanking him. Jinwoo was pinned down, he couldn't see him. I didn't think. I acted. I grabbed a heavy metal fire extinguisher off the wall. It was heavier than I expected, but adrenaline was afire in my veins. While the gunman's attention was on Jinwoo, I ran, low and fast, using the parked cars for cover. I came up behind him. He heard me at the last second and started to turn. I swung the extinguisher with all my strength, slamming it into the side of his head. He crumpled to the ground without a sound. The garage fell silent. Jinwoo stood over the other 2 men, his gun still smoking. He looked at the man at my feet, then at me. I was panting, my hands still gripping the extinguisher, my knuckles white. He walked toward me, his steps measured. He stopped just inches away, his shadow falling over me. He looked from my face, to the extinguisher, to the unconscious man on the ground. "I told you to stay back," he said, his voice dangerously soft. "You would be dead," I replied, my own voice shaking but defiant. He reached out and took the extinguisher from my hands, setting it down gently. Then his hand came up to my face, his thumb brushing against my cheekbone. His touch was electric. "You crossed a line tonight, Chloe," he murmured, his dark eyes searching mine. "So did you," I shot back. "The night you walked into that diner." A strange, tense smile touched his lips. It was not a happy expression, but one of grim acknowledgement. "Being near me is a death sentence," he said, the words a confession. "Why are you still here?" I looked into his eyes, into the cold, controlled darkness that I now knew hid a ghost of its own. And I told him the truth, a truth that was as dangerous and irreversible as pulling a trigger. "Because running from you feels like 1, 2. The tension between us snapped. He leaned in, and for a heartbeat, I thought he was going to kiss me. Instead, he rested his forehead against mine, his eyes closing for a single, brief moment. The smell of smoke and bergamot, the scent of his world, was all around me. "They will not stop," he whispered, his breath warm against my skin. "Now that they know you are my weakness, they will never stop." He pulled back, his face once again an unreadable mask, but I had seen the crack. I had seen the man behind the monster. "We end this tonight." The final confrontation was not in a warehouse or a deserted dockyard. It was in a place of beauty, a modern art museum that Jinwoo's rival, Kim Tae-shik, was using for a charity gala, a perfect cover to establish his legitimacy. Jinwoo's plan was to isolate Kim, to corner him. But Kim had his own plan. He used me. A message had arrived for Jinwoo, a picture of my old apartment building, a place Kim's men must have discovered through their research. The threat was clear. They knew where I came from. They could touch my past. Jinwoo saw it as a clumsy threat, but I saw it as a tell. Kim was emotional, not just tactical. He would want to gloat. He would want me to see him destroy Jinwoo. So, I became the bait. It was my idea. I would allow myself to be taken, to give Jinwoo the access he needed. He refused, his control finally breaking as he yelled at me, the cold facade shattering to reveal the raw fear for my safety beneath. But I was adamant. This was the only way to stop being a pawn. I had to become a player. I walked into the trap. They took me at a coffee shop near the museum, professionally, quietly. I was brought to a service corridor beneath the gallery. Kim Tae-shik was there, a man with a cruel smile and eyes that held no light. "The great Kwon Jinwoo's prize," he sneered, circling me. "I must admit, I don't see the appeal." "He'll kill you for this," I said, my voice steady despite the frantic pounding of my heart. He laughed. "He will come for you. And when he does, my men will be waiting. His empire will be mine by sunrise." But I wasn't just bait. I was a Trojan horse. Sewn into the hem of my dress was a tiny tracking device. And in my hand, disguised as a lipstick tube, was a device that would disable the security network in this corridor for exactly 90 seconds. As Kim monologued, I watched the guards. I waited. My signal to Jinwoo was to drop the tracker. My signal to act was his arrival. The moment I heard the first muffled gunshot from the floor above, I pressed the button on the lipstick and dropped the tracker. The lights in the corridor flickered and died, plunging us into emergency lighting. In the confusion, I moved. I kicked the back of Kim's knee, sending him stumbling. I didn't run for the exit. I ran for the fuse box I had seen on the wall, wrenching it open and pulling the main breaker. The entire wing of the museum went dark. Chaos erupted. Kim's men were blind. Jinwoo's men, equipped with night vision, were wraiths. The fight was brutal, swift, and decisive. Jinwoo himself appeared out of the darkness, moving with a lethal grace. He dispatched the guards near me before cornering a terrified Kim Tae-shik. I didn't watch what happened next. I didn't need to. I had done my part. I had crossed a line I could never uncross, becoming an active participant in his violent world. When the lights came back on, it was over. Jin-woo stood alone, his suit immaculate save for a splash of blood on his cuff. He walked over to me, his eyes scanning me for injuries. He reached out, his hand cupping my jaw, his thumb tracing a line along my cheek. "It is done," he said. "Is he?" I couldn't finish the sentence. "My world has rules, Chloe," he replied, his voice soft. "Debts are paid." He paid his, there was a cost. Park, his silent lieutenant, had been gravely injured protecting their exit. Nothing in this world was free. He looked at me, and for the first time, there were no guards, no masks, no ghosts between us. There was only a man who had built an empire of darkness and a woman who had walked into it and refused to be consumed. "My father told me that loyalty was the only currency that matters," he said, his voice a low, raw thing. "He was wrong. Before you, my world was a fortress. You are the only thing that has ever breached its walls." It was not a declaration of love. It was a statement of fact, more powerful and more binding than any pretty words. He was acknowledging what I was to him. Absolute. Inevitable. He led me from the carnage, up to the now empty gala hall. The floors were polished marble, the walls hung with priceless art. Through the massive windows, the sun was beginning to rise, painting the Seoul skyline in hues of soft pink and gold. We stood there, watching the dawn of a new day. My old life was a distant memory, a story about someone else. This beautiful, dangerous world was my reality now. He came to stand behind me, his arms wrapping around my waist, pulling me back against his chest. I could feel the steady beat of his heart. I leaned my head back against his shoulder, my hand covering his. It was a choice, a conscious, deliberate choice made with my eyes wide open. The waitress was gone. The woman who stood here now belonged to this world, and to the man who ruled it. And she would not have it any other way.